Nintendo Music.
Hello, my friendly freaks. I am Onion Creature, and I wanted to bring to your attention this thing, Nintendo Music app. This was a surprising announcement back in October of 2024, kind of alongside Alarmo. It just came out of nowhere, and you're like, oh right, I guess Nintendo's doing that now. Unlike Alarmo, though, this is something that you might have been able to predict, at least a little bit. Nintendo has been pretty inconsistent with how they distribute their music. They clearly know that it's an important part of the player experience. With that said, though, they have not actually put a great deal of effort into distributing that in any form outside of the game experience itself. There's been a few instances, especially I think back in the 90s, where Nintendo did release a lot more soundtracks, but in more modern times it's been very limited. Disc releases aren't as much of a thing. Music is mostly consumed online over streaming through stuff like Spotify, and very few Nintendo games have been added to services like those. I remember back in the day it was a pretty big deal when the Pokemon Company put several Pokemon game soundtracks on iTunes. A few other Nintendo games have had their soundtracks posted to stuff like iTunes, Kirby Planet Robobot, as well as the 20th Anniversary Orchestra. The Xenoblade games have been released on iTunes, and they're very expensive. It's like $50, and it's like, man, that's quite a bit for a digital album. And then some of those have also ended up on Spotify, like some of the Kirby soundtracks. And then there's been a few select physical versions, like there's a physical version of the Kirby Star Allies soundtrack, which was very expensive but looked super cool. I know they're releasing Super Mario World on vinyl. That is a thing that sort of happens sometimes, but it's extremely inconsistent. So it was pretty cool when Nintendo announced that they were releasing sort of a centralized music streaming platform for their game music. A very exciting prospect. Unfortunately, the execution of this idea has been flawed. As it stands, the experience itself is perhaps not as compelling as it should be. So essentially, this app is included in your Nintendo Switch Online membership. You don't even need the expansion pass. It is included in the base subscription, which is, as far as I recall, $20 a year. And so if you already had that, it's kind of already free. That's not really how it works, but you know, I was going to be paying for this anyway, so this is just kind of a thing that I have access to now. And basically, the question is, does this supplant other ways of experiencing Nintendo music that are not official, specifically YouTube uploads? This has existed for decades now, and Nintendo does sometimes go after these, so it's not necessarily the most consistent. Some games are too obscure to really have full soundtrack uploads. So my hope for this platform is that perhaps one day it can become a place where you just have access to all Nintendo music. But we may have some time to wait before that actually happens, because it's pretty limited as stands, and looks like it's going to remain that way for the foreseeable future. So let's just go through some of the features this app has in its current form, and then we'll discuss what it could look like in the future. Of course, you have Nintendo soundtracks from a variety of systems and games and series. As it stands, it really only seems to be Nintendo published games. There are some games published by Nintendo where Nintendo doesn't own the rights to the intellectual property. We haven't seen any games like that be released on the platform, so I would say that's less likely to happen. You can loop the tracks for I think up to an hour. A lot of uploads of video game music have extended versions, which I use for video editing a lot of the time, but some people just like to listen to longer versions of those tracks, which is a built-in feature of the Nintendo Music app, which is pretty useful for those that enjoy that. It's not available for all music tracks, which is kind of weird. I think some of the omissions I've seen are a bit strange, but it's nice to have it. There's also a hide spoiler feature where you can just hide spoilers if there's a soundtrack on the service that you don't want to be spoiled. There are different playlists included on the app for walking, running, winter seasonal one. That's pretty nice to have stuff like that. You also get pictures for each of these songs included. Sort of looks like a postcard format, which is kind of nice to have. Not a super necessary thing to include, but it's a welcome addition, I suppose. And then lastly, we get one new soundtrack added per week, and there's really not much way of telling what this is gonna be. It's just kind of seems like a random pick out of a hat kind of choice that happens every week. But it does give you something to look forward to every Monday, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Most of the time, I think there's been one or two cases where it deviated from that schedule. Like I think maybe on New Year's there was some overlap with the holiday itself, so they didn't upload new tracks. In most cases, that seems like that's going to be the schedule.
Hello guys, quick little editor update. They added Super Mario Bros. 3 for March 10th, which is Mario Day, which is actually a day before Monday this year. So it looks like they may be adding soundtracks for different anniversaries. So that's another instance where we might see a deviation in this schedule. Very interesting information that I thought you should know.
So that's a bit of an issue. Just the slow trickle is kind of irritating, especially when the app launched without much music. That's not great. There isn't that much bringing me back because, you know, the soundtracks they have are good, but it's just so much more limited than any other, you know, unofficial source you can find for Nintendo music. It's very much lacking in the scope that you would need to have this be something you use consistently, in my opinion. Another big issue is that there's no composers credited in any of the albums, which is, it sucks. It's stupid. It's terrible. This has been commented on many times. This isn't information that's really that hard to find. Basically, all of these games have credits. There's really no reason not to include it other than Nintendo just doesn't care, and also they do seem to view themselves as just an entity, so whenever Nintendo can just say this is something from Nintendo, they prefer to do that as opposed to crediting a single person or team of artists, which is a real shame. It's weird, strange, unfortunate. This can be fixed. It would not be hard. There has been, you know, some public pressure to do so. I don't think it's necessarily a lost cause because it really would not be that hard of a change to implement. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen, but it's not impossible. That's definitely an improvement that's needed. It would also be useful in the app, so if you really enjoy one composer's style, then you could potentially sort by songs that that composer has worked on, which would be a great feature. I think that would be awesome, but it's not included. That's something you can do on virtually any other music streaming app I can think of. Pretty ridiculous not to have it. Big finger waggle for that one, Nintendo. That's a big blunder. Don't do that nonsense. God damn it. There's also another issue in that you can only stream the music over a phone app. Other music streaming apps do have desktop versions, and it's weird that this one doesn't. But yeah, some sort of desktop app would be super necessary. You know, a lot of us have, I don't have the best sound system, but I do have a sound system, so it'd be nice to be able to connect the music to that easily. And then lastly, we're gonna go back to the drip feed system of adding music. So it is better, I'd say, than the way Nintendo adds games to their Nintendo Switch Online apps, which is basically maybe once a month you'll get 1 or 2 games for one of the systems that are included. No real way of telling which that will be. It just happens every once in a while. So that can be a nice surprise when it happens, but it's also extremely inconsistent, and there's no guarantee that the games added will be ones that you're interested in. So it's not a great system, and the system here is better in some ways in that you know that there's going to be something every Monday, give or take a few. The issue is it also can be very inconsistent. I think the other week we got Super Mario Bros. 2 added to the music service, which has, I think, about 8 songs or 8 minutes of music, something like that. Extremely limited track selection, which is fine, but it's not really fine when there's only one album added a week. It's like, oh, okay, that's not really gonna last me very long if I want to listen to that from start to finish, and it doesn't add much to the service in terms of just sheer volume of music. So that's an issue. In terms of all Nintendo music being added, I've done some extremely rough math on how long it will take before all Nintendo published games are included on this service. This also includes a few other things, like I included phone apps, the Nintendo published ones on here. I also included system UI music because they had that for the Wii. They have the Wii channel music on the service. So they potentially could add Wii U music, 3DS music, that kind of thing. So I included all that stuff. Went through all the games that Nintendo has published on all of the systems, selected games that don't have any sort of copyright issues where it's a non-Nintendo IP that they published, that kind of thing. And here's what I came up with. This is the end date. Based on the rate that games are being added, about 55 games added per year. That's going to take us to right around July 26, 2036. Oh God. So that's literally over 11 years from now. So, man, that's kind of rough. So with that said, you know, some of the games I included in my estimate may not actually be included in the service. There's always the chance that they could change up the formula and add more than one album per week. Anyway, that's a long time. That's kind of a ridiculous amount of time, and I don't think that works, probably. It's kind of disappointing to realize that that is potentially about how long it might take. It's like over 10 years to get all Nintendo Music on the app. It just feels a bit too limited in its current form. You know, it does make them feel more special since you only get one per week, but on the other hand, it's like, I feel like it does get you out of the habit of actually using the app if there isn't that much to listen to on it and you've gone through the stuff you want to listen to already. It's a bit of an issue. I did another calculation. I cut it in about in half, where we have 2 game releases per week, and that takes us to about September 13th, 2030, which is also a very long time from now. That's only 5 years about, but still a while away. If this is the way that Nintendo wants to give people access to its music going forward, apart from select physical releases for certain things, I think it's probably just not good enough at this point. You know, it was a novelty when it came out, and I was maybe a bit more forgiving because it was a new thing. And I was like, oh, okay, well, they're finally doing this. They're finally releasing their music in some form. They've been so resistant to put it on more mainstream services, presumably just because Nintendo likes to control things. But the app in its current form, with the issues noted, like the lack of composers, the lack of a desktop app, the lack of music selection, and how slow it is coming out, it's not good enough. And so if I look further into the future, how often am I going to be using this app? Probably not that much. Just looking game soundtracks up on YouTube is still just a lot easier. This hasn't happened too much as far as I'm aware, but I do hope that this app doesn't embolden Nintendo to be more aggressive on taking down unofficial fan uploads of their music, because that would be unfortunate. That would be bad. And if their app is going to be as bare bones as it is in its current form for the next couple of years, that's an issue. That's definitely an issue. So, end of story there. I wanted to just talk about this app, talk about what its future might look like. The fact that it's just music files probably makes it more irritating than the game drip feed on NSO, because on NSO, they're actual games that you can play, but with Nintendo Music, for most of these games, you do have fairly easy access just by Google searching Game X soundtrack. So when it's added to the app, it's like, oh, okay, well, you know, they added A Link to the Past. I could already listen to that pretty easily just on YouTube or whatever. Is this really going to be that compelling every time they add a new game to come back to the app? I don't know, man. It's a thing to think about. It's kind of a freebie for people like me who are paying for the service anyway, but it's potentially an appealing prospect. If you didn't have the Nintendo Online subscription, you'd be like, oh, okay, I get access to Nintendo Music on my phone and maybe my desktop eventually. So I can see that being a potential value proposition, but probably not that much in its current form. So hopefully that can change in the future. There are improvements to be made, and hopefully they are. I also want to thank the viewers for the warm response to my previous video, the Top 10 3DS Games. That was very nice of all the viewers to watch it. It made my day. Thank you all for watching that if you did. All right then, I will let you go. Have a nice day. Bye.